Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks very much for coming along today. My name is Charles Randon, and I work for Lynx Printing Technologies. Lynx is a global provider of coding and marking solutions, and we also practice lean principles in our own production facilities. So I'm here today to talk about coding and marking and how it can help companies to make their production processes leaner. Now, coding and marking is often seen as a necessary evil in production processes, but I'll show you that recent developments in coding and marking solutions really can help to reduce waste and also increase flexibility and productivity in production processes. So this is what we're going to cover in the short session today. First of all, we'll have a quick overview of what we mean by lean manufacturing. We'll also have a look at the role of coding and marking in production and what we mean by coding and marking. And then I'll take a look at how coding solutions are changing, how they're developing, and how this can help contribute to lean manufacturing principles. And then finally, I'll give you some examples, some real examples from customers who have benefited from changes in their coding that have helped them to become leaner. So first of all, what do we mean by lean manufacturing? Well, I think you'll agree that lean is probably a good description of economic conditions right now. And many companies are turning to lean manufacturing principles to help them to become more competitive and more efficient. So what is lean manufacturing? Well, this is a very, very brief summary, of course. But lean manufacturing is all about maximizing value and minimizing waste. And it's not just in a production process. So lean companies look at end-to-end processes throughout their company to see where the value is for their end customers and try and maximize that, but also, of course, then to take out any waste that doesn't really give any value to their customers. So it's not just a production subject, it's for the whole company. And companies adopt lean manufacturing principles because this can give them some real benefits. So to start with, that company can then respond quicker to changing customer demands. Lean manufacturing companies can also deliver higher quality of product. And of course, they can lower their costs too. And they can achieve faster throughput times as well. So there are lots of good benefits to adopting lean manufacturing principles. So if lean is all about maximizing value and minimizing waste, what are the wastes, particularly in a manufacturing process? Any ideas from anyone? Time, okay. Oh, waste of time, okay. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Let's have a look at what we call the typical waste in a manufacturing process. Time, absolutely. But there are other wastes too. And you can see them coming up here. So certainly we have time, waiting in the production process, quality defects, transportation, overproduction, over-processing too, having to do extra things on the production line, carrying too much stock or inventory, too much motion on the production line as well. That wastes time. And we've got one there, unused creativity. I don't know if some of you have looked up lean manufacturing information elsewhere. Often these wastes are called the 7 wastes. At Lynx we call them the 8 wastes because we put this 8th one in. Lean manufacturing is all about continuous improvement. It's not just a one-hit wonder. And so to get that continuous improvement, you need to use the knowledge and experience of everyone involved in the processes, from operators upwards. So it's really important to use their creativity and their knowledge. Well, really, that's a waste. It's a wasted opportunity. So these are the typical wastes that we talk about, that we're trying to minimize in a lean manufacturing company. Now, it may be that your company doesn't practice lean manufacturing as such. You may not consider yourselves to be lean practitioners. but most companies know all about OEE. In fact, as I'm sure you walk around the stands here, you'll see plenty of mentions of OEE, and we heard it in the presentation here just a few moments ago. And there are some similarities and tie-ins, of course, between lean manufacturing and OEE. So rather like the 8 wastes that we're trying to minimise in lean manufacturing, OEE aims to reduce or eliminate the 6 big losses. And these are the most common causes of efficiency loss in manufacturing. So you can see there they include breakdowns and setup and adjustment time. And that affects the availability of a particular process or a particular piece of machinery. You've then got small stops or perhaps restrictions on speed or output. And that affects the rate of production. And then you've got the issue of rejects. Rejects at startup and rejects during the production process. And they will affect the quality of what you're doing. So you can see there's a link there between the 8 wastes in lean manufacturing that we talk about and the 6 big losses that we talk about when we talk about overall equipment effectiveness. So I've been saying that coding and marking is seen as a bit of a necessary evil. What do we mean by coding and marking? Just so that we all know, we're really talking here about coding onto primary or secondary products. So you can see just a few examples here. So coding and marking can be done very simply. You can use hand-applied labels, for example, or hand-applied stamps, going up to more mechanical methods, so roller coding and the like, up to what we would call digital methods. So this is where you're talking about inkjet printing, laser coding, thermal transfer, that sort of thing. Now I've used the words twice, necessary evil so far. Sounds a little bit cruel, but we say that, or customers say that certainly, because, well, why do they have to code? Well, it's for traceability. It's because legislation says that you have to put traceability information onto your products to sell them. But there are also customer requirements as well for their own traceability. And of course, some people use coding and marking not just to put batch codes and date information onto products, but they're using them to put more product identification onto the products themselves. And we'll touch on that a little bit more in a moment. So, what's your view on coding? If you were able to summarize your coding and marking in one sentence or phrase, what would it be? Would anyone volunteer? Anyone use any coding and marking equipment in their production facilities right now?
Accuracy and reliability.
Oh, okay, so you're looking for accuracy and reliability, absolutely. Does your coding equipment deliver that for you now? Some of the time, okay, some of the time, okay. Hopefully you don't see coding and marking as a bigger problem as this gentleman does, moving things around the factory, but to be fair, when we do talk to customers about what they think of coding and marking, here are some of the things they typically say. Could be a bottleneck on the line. Everything has to be coded, absolutely everything. So even though you might have many different production processes in one factory, they've all got to go through the coder at some point. And that means the coder's a bottleneck, particularly if it's not working for some reason. Coding and marking equipment can cause a lot of rework. You mentioned that accuracy and reliability were important. So if your codes are accurate and correct, no problem. But if you put the wrong code on a product, or perhaps there's no code at all on the product, you've got to rework that product. You've got to make sure it's got the right code on. That can cause a lot of wasted time. We get customers saying this as well. Coding and marking equipment's great when it's working, but to keep it working, it needs regular maintenance. And again, that takes time and it adds cost to the business too. Long setup and changeover times as well. Quite often coding and marking isn't the longest lead time when you're changing over for a different product, but in some situations it can be. It can take the longest time. So in lean manufacturing terms, you could say coding and marking doesn't really add any value. It's necessary, but it doesn't really add any value as such to the customer, the end customer. It achieves traceability, which you have to do. but then it does have some potential downsides too. Waiting time, defects as we've said, maybe even transportation if you've got to take products from one line to another just to be coded, and overproduction as well. You may have to fit your production timings around your coding and marking equipment. But the good news is that coding and marking technology is changing. And I'm sure now that you're here at the exhibition, you'll see for yourselves as you go around to the different coding and marking suppliers. They've got some really good new and exciting developments there that really can help to achieve leaner production. So what I'm going to do now is just give some of the ways in which we see the industry developing to help you to achieve leaner production. So we talked about time and waiting time in particular, and the need to reduce that. So how's the industry looking to do that? Well, one big cause of waiting time is maintenance. We mentioned that to keep your equipment running properly, you of course need to keep it maintained. But what we're looking to do in the industry at the moment, as you'll see, is trying to make maintenance less frequent. And that means that there's less downtime for you. That means that we're looking to lengthen the intervals between service intervention on coding and marking equipment, and also looking to make the maintenance procedure itself quicker and easier to do. And you'll see some examples from the different coding and marking suppliers here at the exhibition, I know. For example, instead of getting a service engineer in from your supplier to maintain your equipment, you can maintain it yourself. That certainly saves some time. Making consumables changing more mistake-proof makes them quicker, means that you're not going to get errors, it's not going to cause you downtime. And also, if you are in an environment where you're going to have to keep the production line clean, suppliers are trying to make their equipment easier to clean so that it takes less time to wash down the equipment. When it comes to product changeovers, as I mentioned, sometimes coding and marking doesn't take the longest time in the whole changeover process, but even so, coding and marking suppliers are trying to reduce the time that it takes to make product changeovers. Now, for example, for some customers, that may mean changing from, say, a fixed analog style of coding to a variable digital type of coding. So you're not actually changing anything mechanical when you're changing a code. You're just doing this with a press of a button. But there's more that's happening too. In digital coding, memory storage is getting bigger. Memory seems to be getting bigger on everything right now, so coding and marking is no different. So it means that you can store more information on the coder itself, and it means that you don't have to create codes from scratch. You can just store them in memory and recall them as you need them. And it's not just the code itself, but line settings. So if you've got different products coming down a production line, you can save different line settings in your coding and marking equipment. So again, at a touch of a button, you've changed over the line settings. And you'll also see that coding equipment, by and large, is getting smaller. So suppliers are trying to make their products more compact so they fit more easily on the production line, and they can actually move to where you need them when you need them. And by the way, there's something else here. There's a picture here of a secondary coding technology where that's got another advantage as well in terms of product changeovers, not in terms of the coding itself as such, but this is where you can use coding equipment to put more information onto a package. So what that means is you don't have to have so many variants in your packaging itself. So when it comes to changing over a product, you don't need to change the packaging, you just change the code that you're applying. So what else is the industry doing to try and make production leaner? Well, we talked about the need to reduce defects. You mentioned earlier on accuracy was important in coding. And we want to make sure that when codes are set up on a printer or a piece of marking equipment, that they're the right codes. Because once you set them up, unless you're doing some very good verification checking, you can have a whole batch go through with completely wrong codes on them. We clearly don't want that because of the rework implications. So you'll probably see solutions around the exhibition here that look at total automation of the coding process. But you don't have to go that far necessarily to achieve more accurate coding. You'll see examples of touchscreen interfaces, which are of course on a lot of equipment now, but they're coming in on coding and marking equipment to make the setting up of codes more intuitive. On-screen help as well, because operators don't have to remember then how to set up their coding equipment. It's all there for them on screen. Many digital coders now, you see, have USB ports on them. So just like you can with computers now, you can copy code content from one printer to another. And that's great if you're printing the same code across a number of pieces of coding equipment. Just set it up on one, copy it across into the others. And also, again, for digital coding, you've got limited access to different functionalities, so operators don't get confused by perhaps accessing things they don't need to. So there's some pretty simple ways in which you can reduce the risk of defects. If you want to go to an automated route, there are different ways of doing that as well in the industry. Some equipment allows you to simply attach a barcode scanner, and by scanning a barcode, that will automatically select the code content for you. You can link your coding equipment to PLCs and other equipment on the line, so that, for example, when they make a change, automatically they make a change in the coder too. No need for anyone to do that manually. And then you can step right up to fully automated control, linking your coding equipment to a PC or an IT system even, so that all the code content is downloaded automatically. But all of this is about that accuracy that you talked about, trying to make coding more accurate, taking out the risk of defects. And we talked about a couple of the wastes in lean manufacturing being processes, too many processes, and overproduction too. So now you'll see, with coding and marking equipment at the show, that there's less need to fit your manufacturing process around the coding equipment. And what that means is that coding equipment now needs minimal time to start up. Some of the old coding equipment out there was quite fussy, needed to be left on perhaps because the startup procedures were quite complex, or you needed to run them every day. Not the case now. Also, you'll see that there are coders now that can cover many different applications. They're becoming more flexible. And that's great because that means less variation for you in your production processes, less different types of equipment to maintain and handle, and less inventory too in terms of consumables and spares. Coding from any direction as well. Sounds really simple, but in some instances with older coding equipment, perhaps you've got to handle products in a different way to suit the coder. Coding equipment's actually developed now so that it can fit where it needs to on the production line. And as I mentioned, you don't have to plumb in your coding equipment anymore. You can put it where you need it when you need it. So those are some examples of the changes that you'll see around the exhibition hall in coding equipment. I'd just like to give you now some real-life examples that we've seen at least of how customers have benefited from changing their coding equipment. So first of all, we've got a company that's involved in packaging fruit and vegetables. Now they made a very simple change from hand applying labels to their products to code them to digital coding. You may say, well, that's a pretty simple and obvious change, isn't it? But actually it was quite hard to justify because of the relatively low throughputs. And so it was quite a cost to them to invest in new coding equipment. But they've benefited from that because, well, first of all, they've removed an extra process, the hand labeling. They can do all of their coding in line as part of the packaging process. And they've achieved a huge increase in throughput too. So that has benefited them in terms of how much they're putting through their line, and has helped to justify the move to a more digital coding method. We've got another example here with a pet food supplier. Now they were using coding and marking before to put traceability onto their products, but what they've done is they've changed to a different coding technology. In this case it's thermal transfer, and this means they can apply more data to the pack than their old coding equipment would allow them to. So going beyond the sort of batch and date coding that they used to do. And what this has allowed them to do is reduce their inventory of different packs, because they can now use the coding equipment to put more of the variable product information onto the pack. and that's allowed them to double their outputs. And a lot of that has been achieved by reducing the product changeover time in terms of different packs. And there has been a bit of added value there too for the end customer. I said that quite often coding is seen as not adding value, but in this case, by having new coding capability and being able to add more information to the pack, they're able to put on-pack promotions onto the pack too, so helps their customers to sell more of their product. Let's have a look at a couple more examples here. So here's a supplier of bottled water. They've changed their coding equipment recently. They were using older coding equipment which had the problem of not being very accurate, so they were having to keep an eye on the coding every hour, basically manual checks to make sure that the codes were reliable and were there. So by changing their coding equipment, quite simply, they've got a more reliable code now on their product, and they've been able to cut out some of that extra process, those extra manual checks that they were having to do. They're also finding that they have to do less daily maintenance to get the product going, and that saves them time. They can also use one printer on different lines to put different codes on their primary and secondary packaging, which again saves them inventory in terms of different consumables for different equipment. And they're getting fewer defects as well because of the more reliable printing that they're getting now. And less waiting time too. Just one other example there on this slide. So Twinings Tea, again, a very, very simple change here, moving from one type of laser technology to another. So they were using a mask laser to code onto their products, getting very good clear codes, permanent codes. But they had to change the mask on the laser, of course, every time they needed to change the code. So they've now changed over to a scribing laser technology. That's taken that time out, so it's reduced their waiting time. Sounds like a really simple change, I know, but in fact we've got other examples in this industry as well, where this has allowed companies to move to more generic packaging as well, because the scribing laser can put more information on whilst it's printing the traceability information that's required. So it's reduced their inventory of different packs and variants of those. Just a couple more examples. So pharmaceutical contract packaging, you can see that there are lots of savings for different types of industries that are possible with new coding equipment. So here, this is where we've got a customer who's connecting up several of their printers just to one PC to centralise the control of the codes. Now that means, of course, that they can get the accuracy of the coding that they need, but it means there's less setup time as well as they change batches and change products. It's all controlled centrally. So that means they've got less waiting time when they're switching over products, and they're getting fewer defects as well, because there are less people involved in setting up codes. And as a handy byproduct as well, they're getting more management information on how productive their production lines are. And finally, here's just an example from dried foods packaging. This is a customer who packages all sorts of food additives, salts, and all sorts of powdered products. Now they've got a huge variation in their production, in their product lines, and therefore they need a very, very mobile and interchangeable production facility. So they've got printers that are very mobile too. They move to when they're needed, where they're needed, and they're interchangeable. So because they can use one printer for several production lines, it means they can get faster changeovers. It also means they've got less waiting time because they haven't got to set up lots of different machines, less transportation because they move the coder to where it's needed, not move the products to where the coder is. And of course, if you can use one coder for several lines, it's going to save you money too. So, I hope you'll agree that if you look at the changes that you'll see around the exhibition today in coding and marking equipment, that it really can help you to reduce waste and become more flexible and more productive. Here are some tips though that I'd like to propose for looking at new coding and marking equipment, because it is a significant investment. First up, run a trial. Sounds strange for somebody from the coding and marking industry to be saying this. No, don't do that. Just buy it off the brochure, please. That would be great. But we actually want you to get the right coding and marking solution. So run a trial. Make sure that you put the product on your line, the coding equipment on your line, to make sure that it really does eliminate waste for you. And don't just look at the coder in isolation. Again, as a coding and marking supplier, I'd say, look at my coder. Isn't it great? Look at all the great features on it. But look at how the coder fits into the production process and how it can eliminate waste, not just in the coding and marking, but elsewhere on the line too. For example, eliminating variance in packaging, so you can use more generic packaging. And ask your supplier to give you real examples of how they've helped customers to get leaner. Suppliers are helping customers to do this every day. For you, coding and marking purchases might only be every few years. So use your supplier's knowledge. Get real life examples from them. And of course, I would say this as somebody from the industry, new coding and marking equipment is an investment, but you would be surprised at how fast it can pay back. But it's really important that you look at all of the costs of ownership. So they're just some tips from us on having a look at different coding and marking solutions. So in summary, lean manufacturing is all about maximizing value for the end customer and minimizing waste. And we believe that coding solutions have changed and will continue to change to support lean principles. So that means reducing waste, reducing waiting time, fewer defects, less overproduction, and fewer processes. And we really do believe that coding and marking solutions can help you to get leaner, because that means that you can respond more quickly to your customers' changing demands, you can achieve higher quality, reduce your costs, and increase your productivity. So it's great that you're here today at the exhibition. It's a really good opportunity to take a fresh look at your coding and marking solutions. Thank you. Thanks very much.